So we go. Well, hello and welcome to the first cover seminar of the year. Today we're joined by Dan Mcquillan, who I've never met before, but I'm quite interested in the book you just put out fairly recently called "Resisting AI: An Anti-Fascist Approach to Artificial Intelligence," which I heard you talk about on the very good Asset Horizon podcast. And it struck me that you are doing something, bringing together two things which are extremely timely. One of those things being more unfortunate in its timeliness than the other, namely the anti-fascism, because it'd be a lot nicer to not have to talk about fascism, but we do. So, with that lovely combination in mind, it would be nice to invite along Dan to talk about his work. So, with that short intro, I will turn it over to you, Dan. Go, Dan.
That's it. That works. If only every talk started that way. Yeah, thanks very much, Stephen, for inviting me. And I'm sorry, everybody, that I didn't have time to put any slides together. So it's basically my face. I also didn't really put together a talk properly, but what I thought was I'd assemble a set of questions that I find interesting, answer them myself, and then we could throw it open to everyone else's answers. So the questions I've got there's actually quite a lot of them. So I'm going to talk relatively quickly. The questions I've got is, does AI actually work? Why is so much being invested in AI? Will it fix our public services? If I'm an educator but I don't embrace AI, am I a Luddite? Did Francis Galton invent deep learning? Is AI fascist? Will AI save us from climate change? Does decomputing mean I have to give up my laptop? And how do we resist AI? And so without further ado, does AI actually work? Well, I mean, AI is many things to many people. I'm referring to deep learning or neural networks, artificial neural networks, which have been around for 70 years or more, right? So they're not a sci-fi tech from the future. They have really taken off in the last decade or so. That's largely because of social media data being available and the GPU chips, which can actually do the calculations fast enough for it to mean anything. And they are, neural networks per se, very generalizable approximations of functional transformations. If you've got some kind of input data and you've got some desired form of output, and there's any way to find some kind of patterned connection between those two things, then AI will find it, or more importantly, make it up. So these patterns are only over correlations, right? That I mean, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, but there's no causality in these things. There's no world model, no understanding. So when we're talking about AI, as I'm referring to it, so whether it's from deep learning or transformer models, the latest, greatest, they're always faking it, even when they get it right. Okay, so if you ask ChatGPT something and it comes up with a pretty good plausible answer, or you ask ChatGPT something and it talks nonsense, from the machine's point of view, that's an equally optimized answer. The other thing about their generalizability is, which I think is quite important, I might mention Geoffrey Hinton later on, is that you can kind of ditch the domain understanding bit. In the old days of machine learning, in order to make anything meaningful come out at the end, you had to really engage with the people who were doing the thing. You had to kind of have some, at least, understanding of it, so you could model and approximate what it was that was going on. With AI, that's not really necessary. You can just dump that if you've got enough data and the right architecture. So relevant to some of my other questions, predictive AIs. So there's kind of generative AI, but before that, beneath that, and around that, and to my mind, of more profound social implication is predictive AI, and that mostly comes in the form of risk modeling, which is basically about producing judgments based on superficial patterns in data, while actually at the same time obscuring any of the underlying structural determinants. So, first question: does AI work? And I'd say definitely not. If there's any claim that it understands anything, right? I'd say also definitely not if you ever want any answers you can trust. But I say that it does work. It does work definitely as an anti-worker technology, whether it's controlling or surveilling or replacing workers, as now is happening. And I also think it works as a massive diversion from the urgent need for actual change, which I'll come back to. So if it doesn't really work in so many ways, well, it does in these others, why is there so much being invested in it? Well, there's off the scale investment. NVIDIA recently, which is the one that makes most of the GPUs for this stuff, so it's kind of spades in the gold rush. A couple of months ago, that was the most valuable company on the planet, right? So the money going to this stuff is ridiculous. And there seems to be this a belief, including across the EU, for example, that this is the future to economic growth and it is the future to geopolitical influence, which is really interesting. Why are these beliefs pervasive? I think we can get some answers if we think about where we're at right now, current conditions. We've got ongoing austerity since the crash of 2008. We've got the after effects of COVID-19 and the pre-effects of the next pandemic. We've got the climate crisis. And I think we've got a general fracturing of the neoliberal order. So I suggest the reason why AI is seen as any kind of answer is because, if I can say, the system as a whole doesn't really have any answers. And AI is one thing it can throw at the polycrisis, not the only thing, but one of them. And importantly, it's one of those things that doesn't require any actual questioning of the underlying order. It masquerades as some kind of solution. It continues a neoliberal program, privatization and enclosure. That's definitely what AI does. I mean, as we've also seen in Gaza with the application of machine learning, of course, AI will also turn out to be, given the chance, an engine for genocide, which would definitely explain part of the military investment in it. But for the rest, it's just seen as a means of squeezing more out of people while claiming to have a fix for collapsing services, which leads me to my next question, which is, will AI fix public services? Okay, that's a bet that's been made pretty big time, especially in the UK. The Labour Party regime, if I can call it that, are really deep drinkers of the Kool-Aid when it comes to AI. There are a number of problems here. One is, for example, with their first target, the welfare system, AI does work when it comes to the welfare system, but only as an engine of suspicion. We've seen examples already. There's Australia's robo-debt. There's the several examples in the Netherlands around child benefit of machine learning-driven scandals. We know that when you apply algorithms to these situations, you get more bureaucratic cruelty, more racist discrimination. So I'm just going to briefly quote from the book. The way AI constructs problems to be solved diverts our attention from the underlying issues, thereby enabling the extractivism of the status quo to continue unabated. In the process, it reconstructs us as subjects who can be blamed as the source of those same problems. So it's a good system if you're on the other side of it. But what about healthcare? I hear you cry. Surely AI speeding up of cancer scanning will save lives. And this is actually a claim made by by a Labour politician whose name completely escapes me right now. The guy who's the DSIT, Department of Science and Innovation Technology, whatever it's called. This is, in fact, his emotive claim about his own mother. We need AI because it'll help save lives because of cancer scanning. This is an old trope. I mean, Geoffrey Hinton, a sort of who described as one of the godfathers of AI, was actually saying back in 2016 we should stop training radiologists, right? Because convolutional neural networks, which was the image recognition stuff, that's where AI really took off. Was good enough, and is actually better than people, and we don't need radiologists anymore. And this is a deep example of sort of not wanting to understand domain knowledge, and turned out to be completely wrong, because it turns out that radiology involves a lot more than scanning images, especially having relationships and actual understanding of any of these things, really. So I'd say, pitching ahead, the evidence would suggest that any services that are to any great extent substituted with AI as part or whole of them will be shoddy and will be second best. And we'll be told they're good enough, especially if they're good enough for the poor, especially if they're good enough for the global south. So let's look at a particular one of those. As educators, mostly, I'm guessing, or many of us, we know that AI is heading straight for us. It's already here in many ways, right? So my next question is, if I'm an educator and I don't embrace AI, am I a Luddite? Should I say maybe? And that's a good thing, right? Because the Luddites were right. So let's ask some Luddite questions about AI in education. Does it serve the common good? To divert funding from AI to when you've got roofs in school buildings that are literally collapsing. This is something in the UK. Or to build a data store of information taken from the children for AI companies to train their tools to stimulate the edtech market. I mean, the fact that any educator could take this prospect seriously, I think, just shows the level of desperation in education generally, right? And certainly, which is an argument they hear quite a lot, that any educator who is, perhaps reluctantly adopting this stuff on the basis that the kids need to know about, the young people, the students will need to engage with AI in the world of work, is, to my mind, missing the point that AI is actually a fundamentally anti-work technology. So this will immiserate students' prospects of getting work. If you've ever tried, my son has tried doing these AI job application systems, and definitely their experience in work itself. So, this is not any kind of boon. The underlying problem, though, I would say, is that most of what as an educator, most of what we're involved in is kind of pre-automated, right? It's pre-automatized. That the neoliberal transformation of education has given a system that's standardized, optimized, and scalable, which is exactly the core values of the machine learning industry. So it's ripe for the taking. So my suggestion is that instead of teaching young people how to do prompt engineering, the arrival of AI is a prompt itself, right? To re-examine the whole state of teaching and learning. Because if we don't, AI will be amplifying the tendencies that are already there, and we will end up with social filtering at scale. Which brings me to my next question. Did Francis Galton invent deep learning? So of course, he was the Victorian inventor of eugenics, or coining of the term eugenics, at least. And sorry, I lost my stopwatch. I think it's going to be quite important. Yeah, so neural networks, they have a long history going, they have a direct connection to this Victorian eugenics, right? Particularly in maths like linear regression and correlation, which are absolutely at the core of machine learning and AI, and were absolutely created by Galton and by Carl Pearson for their explicitly eugenicist projects. And you've got the idea of general intelligence, right? AGI. That's why OpenAI and DeepMind are quite explicit. They were founded to deliver AGI, right? So this is the G factor, Charles Spearman's G factor, and that also goes back to I mean, he was another eugenicist, and sorry about us. And then you've got IQ and the weaponization of IQ, which directly comes from that, and so on and so forth. You can follow this all the way through. What have we got now? We've got generative AI, right, which seems to be creative. I can create pictures of goldfish on the moon driving a bicycle or whatever it is. That's really because the patterns, it's learning a lot of patterns, and it's applying them in what they call latent data space. So not in overt images, but in a distilled form of them, or text, right? So it applies these patterns in latent data space. They appear to be superficially interesting and creative, but they're really based on an absolutely vast form of averaging. It's like Quetelet's average man, but in high dimensional vectors, right? So what have we got? We've got deep learning. That excels at ranking, classifying, and segregating. We've got generative AI, which is basically a kind of deep normativity. So we're all set. We're all set for optimizing across populations, right? Bell curves at scale to modify the distribution of life chances in ways that designate certain kinds of people as relatively disposable. Which brings me to my next question, which I'm going to order these things right. So, my next question seems to be, is AI fascist, right? Which is a question I get asked a lot because it's my own fault for subtitling my book, An Anti-Fascist Approach to Artificial Intelligence. But as Stephen has validated, it still seems to be a pretty relevant point. And it's a fair question. I wouldn't say AI is fascist because fascism is a political force and AI is a technopolitical phenomenon. But I would say that it has these aspects, the operations of essentializing difference, enabling transformative violence, and algorithmic states of exception, which are all things I talk about in the book. They do tend to amplify what I'd now refer more concisely to sort of currents of microfascism. Those less than overt but very pervasive forms of social interaction and material instantiation that carry the sort of seed of later fascistic events, phenomenon like the pogroms in Southport or whatever. These things are constantly present, and I think particularly present across the same institutions. So I wouldn't say AI is fascist, but I wouldn't say it's just technological solutionism, which would be bad enough. I would say that it's a form of fascistic solutionism. And at the same time, these AI companies are controlled by people who think, democracy is out of date and it's time for the tech overlords to have their day. We've got the pervasive ideas of what I call cosmic eugenics, things like long-termism and the sort of doomer perspective. And I think if you don't know this kind of stuff, you'd be really shocked how deeply this is pervaded into government policy. I mean, here in the UK, but I'm sure not only. Right, if you hear the term AI safety, right, it's definitely got roots in that. What I'd say overall is that AI is used, I'll come back to that point, right? AI is used as a diversion from structural problems. And it's in exactly the same way that to me, it's used in exactly the same way that the far right is used by mainstream politics as a way from diverting from the failures of the status quo. And I think these things will end up very entangled with some very bad outcomes, especially given the rising tensions particular population movements caused by the climate crisis, which brings me to my next question. Will AI save us from climate change? So these claims fall into a couple of classes. One that's going to optimize current systems, which actually doesn't turn out to be very compelling, but also really isn't sort of restructuring in the way that we need to change the pattern of economic activity, or that they're core to green tech, like carbon capture, which is anyway a bit of a fantasy. What is the actual situation with AI? So we've got these models like large language models, for example, could be typically now something like 10 to the 26, so it's 10 with 26 zeros, operations, floating point operations to train the model, which is just a lot, basically. So they're using a lot of energy and they require massive parallel processing. You've got the expansion of the hyperscale data centers to facilitate this stuff, and they just basically, they're like a sort of black hole. They swallow entire electricity grids, and they swallow entire local water tables as well, because all this stuff needs cooling. Now, the corporations are always blabbing on about their green credentials, but it's complete sleight of hand. It's because they're already grabbing the renewable resources that there are, as what's happening in Ireland, or they're just like making it up with carbon credits, which themselves are completely meaningless. So what's actually happening right now is probably many have seen, which is a really good rise in sort of a journalism and investigative reporting about this stuff. You've got gas plants that were already retired to satisfy, carbon targets are being brought back online in order to provide energy for AI. You've got the Microsoft signing a deal apparently to bring the 3 Mile, not the 3 Mile Island reactor that melted down, but the other 3 Mile Island. But anyway, that was retired, and they're bringing that nuclear reactor back in order to power generative AI. So, what's happening in general terms? The AI industrial complex is catalyzing the same kind of competition over energy and mineral resources that drove imperial expansion in the 19th century. It's like for like. And that stuff was justified at the time by the same eugenics ideologies that I've already mentioned. So I'm proposing a thing at the moment, I'm proposing a thing called decomputing as a way to tackle this stuff, trying to tackle the environmental degradation and the basically degrading effect on society at the same time. So my penultimate question, you'll be relieved to hear, is you may not like the question, does decomputing mean I have to get rid of my laptop? So decomputing does kind of, it follows the name, right? It does mean sort of less computing. It means computing within limits. It means a care for life through low power infrastructure. It means, standpoints of salvage and repair. But what I'm trying to basically get at is, for starters, degrowth, because AI has an absolute fetishization for scale and a dependency on scale, but it has a fetishization of scale. And that to me is exactly like the other same, empty metric, which is GDP, right? It acts exactly the same way to conceal what is really a form of destruction inherent in a fundamental belief in infinite growth. Decomputing is also about the decolonial, because, as I think it's already tried to say, this stuff is intrinsically and foundationally colonial, recolonial, if that's the thing. Decomputing is a move to delegitimize this extractivism, to impose what I think of as embedded logics of empire in the whole AI industry. Its central point would be a refusal of any hyperscale infrastructure. That's the stuff that really is built for AI. And a commitment instead, right? So it's like abolition. It's something else. So it's a commitment to social production, to relation over the reductive, to rejection of assetization in favor of commoning. And it tries to address the material harms of infrastructure and also AI's proposition of solutionism across the board, which actually blocks other ways we could tackle problems. And so what's really trying to be is a route to different forms of this idea of just transition, which is the justice for workers and communities under the transformation to a decarbonized economy. So it's really taking, decomputing at the end of the day is trying to take seriously the Luddite core, right? Put down all machinery hurtful to the commonality. So how do we start the process of decomputing? And that brings me back, in a way, brings me back to the book, or brings me back at least the idea of resisting AI and the need to resist AI. And the main proposal from the book really about actually how to do that was through forms of workers and people's councils. The idea is to oppose these automatized hierarchies with some kind of horizontal autonomy. But it's really because, to my mind, this technopolitical dilemma, requires technopolitical strategies of some kind. So the idea of these forms or formations are things that transform material structures and social relations at the same time. AI is not complicated because of the math, although some of the math is a bit complicated. It's complicated because it's an apparatus. right? It's a form of computation. It's a configuration of concepts, its investments, its policies, its institutions, and its subjectivities. And they produce kinds of worlds, or a kind of world, right? So we need an alternative apparatus that does, put very simply, the inverse of it in a way, but that produces different technical structures, different social structures. Because AI's real effect in the world is precaritization, I think. It's precaritization of lives on the one hand, precaritization of the environment on the other. And the alternative is some kind of just transitions from the bottom up. AI's metapolitics, if you like, just to like throw to the sort of study of fascism, it's got a metapolitics, and that's optimization. And I propose a counter metapolitics of commonization, really. AI is an apparatus whose operations produce aspects of the world at the level of separation between material and agency. So I propose that any alternative apparatus must support the recomposition of collective subjects alongside technical practices for the common good. Okay, sorry for this fast talking, but I really wasn't sure how long it would last. I can read the questions again if anyone's interested.
Go for it. So, thanks for that, Dan. That has given us quite a lot. So I will see. I think Ant was raising your hand, weren't you? Or was I imagining that?
Sorry, I was just clapping.
Oh, sorry. Sure, look, go for it.
Yeah. Yes, I am almost there. Yeah. Hi. I'm a PhD student in AI and music, and I'm also very leftist. So I agree with almost everything you said. But what I personally disagree with is maybe it's just for the sake of rhetoric that you put it that way, but it seems to me that you categorize the entire technology as inherently embodying inherently by architectural whatsoever organizational assemblages and so on, that are the values and interests that were behind the production of this technology are the technology. And I will say, why cannot we imagine like the same way you point towards the computing? Does the computing involve a production of a different AI, or does it involve removing it from the equation, or like resisting it, not producing it altogether?
Yes, thanks very much for the question. I mean, you know, I'm not like saying for sure. I'm definitely saying we should resist it. And personally, I am an AI abolitionist, I would say. I didn't start out that way. I did start out writing a book. I think the original title for the book might have been something like AI for Good or AI for the People or something like that, right? Which isn't really even the same thing you're talking about, because that is explicitly saying that AI could be turned towards positive social ends, if you like. And I think you're just kind of saying, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, don't tar the whole thing. Yeah, and I'm saying, well, okay, but I've kind of tried to find that space, and I don't find it. I won't say good luck, because obviously I oppose the whole thing, but I'd say, you're kind of, I mean, you're going to try whether I like it or not. But I think the center of gravity of this particular forms of I'm talking about, I try to be specific at the same time as being very general, because I think a lot of what I'm talking about is a technopolitics, right? I'm trying to zoom out from AI per se being a sort of pressing issue of our time, to say, well, if it's not going to be this particular kind of AI, if it's not neural networks, it's going to be something else. And it's good to have a kind of technopolitics, actually. I think that's what's missing a lot of the time, right? It's an actual technopolitics. But looking at things that are based on neural networks, it's not that I've never seen any positive uses of them, but they are so incredibly outweighed by the damage that's just done, that careens along with such momentum. that seems to be so inextricable from the way the computation works, from the industry functions, from the way it gets its data. I mean, that's probably the biggest thing that I hear from people in the creative industries. You know, it's like we're signing up to AI. It's like Turkey signing up for Christmas. You know, it's like this is we're dead meat. You know, there are just so many things about it that I'm just like, this is the wrong road. You know, so I don't believe in AI for good, for sure. This form of AI we're talking about, I don't believe in connectionist AI for good. Bun that, as they say. It's not that I'm totally against computation, you know, which is good because I work in a computing department. But I think we really have to just have to be very Luddite about it. I think, and we have to say, what effect is this having on the commonality, and what might the alternatives be? You know, like I personally have a bit of an interest in old school cybernetics in the sense of Stafford Beer's sort of viable systems model and that kind of thing, which isn't itself even a technology. You know, it's a pattern, but it's a pattern that's very amenable to computing, I think. But yeah, I just think that I just find for my own position that the harms done by these things are just accelerating, amplifying. They're folding in on themselves, and we just have to push back. You know, who knows? At the end, maybe there's a space for very niche applications of this stuff under very controlled conditions. I don't know. But right now, I know at the most.
But of course, sorry if I jump
sorry.
in, but it's really directly connected to also a paper
Sure.
I'm trying to write, and the idea is like, sure, the hegemonic understanding of this technology, as you say, you can trace it back to the what was it called? What was the name?
Eugenics.
No, I mean, eugenics too. Eugenics too. Yeah, the
Brilliant.
the TESCREAL bundle. But no, but the connection, the connection can be traced back to this precise meeting they had in the UK in the 50s, and from there on, that has taken over and that has redefined what AI is, and basically that is what we understand as AI. Yes, but it's not like pattern recognition is inherently reproducing capitalist structures and the structure of oppression and whatnot, because of the technology itself. It's the data that we feed the technology is the entire assemblage of policies, narratives, the people who actually invest in this technology that bring about this reproduction of biases. It's not like like,
well,
yeah, right.
If I can take it, I'll take my turn to interrupt
Yeah,
you.
yeah, sorry.
Yeah, you know, which is, you know, fine. I mean, I agree. There isn't just the technology. That's because there is no such thing as just technology. Right? There's no tool, I don't believe, personally, right? Personally, I don't believe there's such a thing as just a tool or just an algorithm. There's no algorithm that's separated from a social matrix that it came from. It doesn't mean I'm not being deterministic about these things, right? Because that's kind of part of the problem, right? But I'm just saying, okay, let's look at the evidence of where this stuff is going. So I would say, I think we're on the same wavelength in that we have to deal with these things as assemblages. And I would say, I had a point a minute ago, I temporarily lost it. I would say it's definitely not just the data, for example. You know, it is the whole. The problem includes the very specifics of these algorithms, and I think they also. This is my other point, and why I bothered putting the quote in, I think, because they also do shape the technopolitics is so pervasive to us that it actually affects our structures of subjectivity, if not even our structures of consciousness. But I don't want to talk about that stuff because that's too much in AI, right? But just our subjectivities and our relationalities are actually shaped by this stuff, which means it's very difficult, or if not impossible, for us to say what would be a good use of this thing under current conditions. You know, I think we have to make space where, you know, that clears the ground from all of the clearly toxic and necropolitical agendas that find it so easy to force their way through these kind of technopolitical apparatuses in order to find out what might be a non-toxic technopolitical apparatus. And right now, I'm not that personally, I guess, just not that interested. Yeah, I'm not invested in it. I'm not that interested. I just want to throw something in front of the juggernaut.
So if I can jump in here, when you're talking about, you say, let's say questioning or resisting forms of technology that undercut commonality. I really like that distinction, because to me, it reminds me of the Pennsylvania Amish. And the particular reason it reminds me of the Amish is oftentimes people think of Pennsylvania Amish as being purely anti-technology, but they're not. Their approach is rather based on the distinction, saying when a new technology is introduced, they have a discussion about, does this technology undercut commonality in a way we find corrosive, that's rejected or not. So for instance, they will use, for instance, tractors, because tractors are part of a collective harvesting process, which actually builds commonality rather than undercuts it. Well, for instance, individual televisions in homes do. So they reject that. So there's almost this distinction where you have a process of appraising new technologies, thinking through how will this affect sociality, and then responding to them based upon that. And so it makes me think that if you want to use that distinction for us, how could we even have a social process that would appraise that in the present? Because we're not a small, closely knit bound community like the Amish, right? So, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Could you imagine something like that, or how would that be possible?
well, it's difficult to imagine, which is kind of the problem, right? Because imagination is also tied up with these things. I personally don't really, there's the whole area of AI governance, and there's these attempts to, in name only, I would say, do something much milder of the version that you're talking about. To evaluate carefully AI's technologies. I think what I'm advocating is kind of, oh my God, what's that phrase from the 1980s fascist thing? Leaderless resistance. Yeah. Anyway, let's skate over that one. I think what I'm talking about is I mean, the interesting about AI is the convergence of so many things, right? That's why in particularly this moment, it's a convergence of all of the, most of the, in practice, it's a convergence of most of the negative social dynamics that we could name, and economic and environmental. But it also provokes the idea of there being many points of resistance, essentially, right? I think I'm not surprised, and I'm trying to kind of understanding of why, but why is it that in universities, which I'm guessing quite a few people here are in, there isn't a militant or many militant oppositions to any introduction of AI into education? That to me should be a starting point, or definitely it should come in healthcare, or definitely it should come in community care, definitely it should happen in mental health, or any of the areas where this stuff is being forced down people's throats actually faster than you can name. It's absolutely accelerationist in that sense, right? It's going everywhere. And so I would see a starting point, what I was, like, I'm sure pretty badly trying to articulate was a pattern of, I guess, self-organization that can be started anywhere in order to bring that particular form of questioning to bear in a local and situated context. To say, okay, for us as community care workers, this proposition to introduce this algorithmic mechanism is actually going to undermine what we're trying to do, because, or we need to set up these mechanisms for assessing it, or whatever it is. And that implies, of course, all of those things that we don't really have at the moment, like workers having some influence over their own conditions and so on and so forth. So, it's very tied into the idea of any form of self-organization and any form of influence by communities and workers. But I suppose the plus side of it for me is that, if there is such a thing, is that the necessity for multidimensional resistance to AI, because it touches its areas, has some potential to converge social movements or social currents. It's like I'd see AI as a place where precaritized worker resistance meets the climate movement, meets feminism, meets whatever. It's got that potential because it cuts across and cuts into all these sort of areas. So I'd say, without rambling too much, it's just kind of anywhere really where AI is being proposed as a solution is a good reason to go, wait, we need to get it together here, because this is going to really screw things up for us and for the people that we allegedly work for and with. And that, depending on the circumstance, might also bring people into contact with existing still existing resistant social movements. I mean, I'm personally doing a bit of work with First Peoples in Canada around their exposure to AI, particularly through its introduction into sort of museums, galleries, and archives. And that's really interesting because they are still resisting, and their forms of resistance are extremely appropriate to AI because they've already been through this shit, and they know exactly what it means when somebody comes along to say and offered to solve everything for you as long as you give them all their stuff. So I think the odds are really not looking great right now for anything, but it does, at the very least, opposition, resistance to AI does provide a focus for a convergence of still existing social forces around the idea of self-organized change to a point that opens up the possibility of actual alternative worlds of some kind, however small they might be. And my imagination might be that these smaller but alternative realities that people try to push back on do find some way of federating in the longer term.
I am happy to keep asking things, but I will see if other people have things they want to ask.
Hi, Dan.
Hi.
Hi, Stephen. Sorry, just turning my camera on. Yeah, great to see you, Dan. So I just using this last example that you gave around the work with the First Peoples in Canada. My issue with that is that with decomputing as the most radical response that we can have to all this change that I didn't ask for. Some people might have. My only worry is whether that is just going to destroy this opportunity of actually connecting with other parts of the world if we're down to just organizing within our communities in the proximity of where we live or work. And I know that the internet was supposed to be a collective intelligence platform, and it's corrupted as well severely. But I do think, especially being an immigrant living on the other side of my own country and believing in internationalism, I do struggle with the constraints that it would bring if we were to completely resist and give up our devices and computers and everything. So
yeah, sorry.
No, that's it. I just like to hear your reaction.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I should have been a bit clearer when I said, does decomputing mean I have to give up my laptop? I should have said no. Okay, not necessarily. Obviously, all of these technologies are quite problematic, and I think another thing that AI is to me a lot of the time this apparatus is very much a kind of condenser. It sort of amplifies, intensifies, condenses things that are already problematic. In fact, that's my main riff about AI. Really, it's like things are already a bit shit, and AI comes along and sort of amplifies that. So it's not that there's no problems. We all know there's problems with laptops. There's we have to look at the sort of global distribution of e-waste or whatever it is, or the lithium mining or whatever. Right, we've got problems. But again, I don't. I hope I'm not trying to have my cake and eat it. I am very clearly against, as far as I'm concerned, every instantiation of connections to AI that I've ever seen. Okay, but I did say I'm not against computing, and I should have said that you don't have to throw your laptop away or necessarily the internet. I'm a big fan of the internet personally, and I was just reading a good talk. I'm just looking up what it's called here. There's somebody called Molly White. She's really famous for dissing, really like being just this kind of absolute prolific and insightful critic of the whole Bitcoin blockchain nonsense. She just posted her talk, "Fighting for Our Web," which goes back through, like it's good because you read the first part, it's like the excitement, remember the original excitement of being on the internet. So it's fantastic for all those reasons and many others, So again, I just think that what's happened to the internet shows that we really need a technopolitics, because it is just a kind of surveillance and exploitation extraction machine now. Although we can still have these conversations, although Zoom did try to sell all of these conversations as well, I think, to AI training companies. I don't think they succeeded, but I'm not totally sure. So yeah, it's like, I'm not saying, it's like Luddism doesn't mean, as Stephen was saying, it doesn't mean do without technology. It's not like, I'm not talking about radical primitivism or something. I'm talking about being much, much more militantly critical and organized about where technology is going, whatever technology it is that we're being sold, and learning the lessons, of what happened to the internet, what happened to social media. I mean, social media was cool, I think, at one point, right? So, but I absolutely think that the question of AI as a globally, let's say just sticking with AI for the moment, because that's my kind of main topic, it is a colonial industry, with global reach. And to me, it's as, if you ever look at a map of submarine cables, the ones that make the internet work, it is quite incredible that how closely they map onto the trade routes of the 19th century empires. And that's, of course, no coincidence, right? Everything from the telegraph buildings to the submarine, it's just, and the financial centers and everything else, right? So one of the technopolitical questions, just rambling a bit, is, do we through our technologies, do we recapitulate what came before, or do we make something different? And we're not asking, we're not challenging that. We're not able to challenge that enough, and we're not challenging it enough when it comes to AI. But it's very clear that any substantial pushback against AI is going to have internationalist aspects. I mean, the examples that I see of the kind of model of change I would think of are not, haven't so far been about AI itself. But when I was looking into the question of just transition, and I was doing some stuff in Scotland, I was remembering the very clear, because it was Scottish workers who refused to repair Hawker Hunter aircraft, I think it was, for Pinochet's Chile. Right. So it's the idea of internationalist worker solidarity, or just internationalist solidarity, I think is provoked by the existence of AI and should come up again. So I'm not arguing against internationalism. I'm not arguing against technologies or means or mechanisms that facilitate that. I'm trying to be clear about what it is that we should argue against. And I'm clear for myself that AI itself is a kind of 100% instantiation of the stuff we're trying to struggle against.
Go for it, Luca.
Yeah. I agree with the fact that AI, 99% of it, or basically all of it, when you come to the marketable side of it, because when you restrict yourself to research, you can start seeing interesting stuff. When you go in the market, you see even serial fraudster serial killers, as I like to call them, people that are trying to market end of life care through AI. What is that? Supposing that an LLM can capture the subjectivity of a dying person and decide in their place what is next, instead of me writing it down or taking a video. And actually, that's what I say now that I have the capability and whatnot. Of course, but there are also good examples, like there are community fostering indigenous-led projects in New Zealand now that are using natural language processing to revive the Maori language. They are using AI to revive and
yeah, I think that's where we need to be careful about definition of AI. I'm not saying AI is machine learning.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
because I
Okay.
think there are some very specific issues that come with AI, right?
Okay.
So, yeah. So because I think that is intractably inevitable. For example, questions of scale, right, and also questions of capacity. There's no, large language models are not a community project, right? 10 to the 26 floating point operations is several weeks on several hundred H100s. Okay. I know a couple of projects in Aotearoa, and they don't have that kind of kit, and they're not going to get that kind of kit, and they shouldn't get that kind of kit. Okay. I do think I agree with you. I think natural language. I think that language preservation, language, is an area where, and there's crew that, if you want to kind of another comparison, there's a bunch called Animiki, who are First Nations, Native American tech company in sort of USA, so-called USA, so-called Canada, right? They have a similar approach to the Maori projects, and they are trying to identify how can they make use of certain technologies, and they're very much applying the kind of thing we're talking about, very much applying the kind of thing Stephen was talking about. They're very much applying this kind of, we have historical experience of being completely screwed over. So whatever it is we do with these technologies, we cannot allow that to happen. So it means we're not going to give up our data to any company that comes along with some product like Whisper or whatever and claims that this is going to help us maintain our language, because we know that this is a con, a steal, and just another excuse to rip us off and subjugate us. That doesn't mean we're not going to use technology. That's good. So I am being very specific and in a way kind of narrow, though it's not exactly narrow, is it? I mean, AI. Can I say that right? Not narrow, because it's like being pushed. They've invested, and one of the consequences of them investing so much is they've got to shove it everywhere. Otherwise they're never going to reclaim their investment, right? But
yeah, Tony Blair, for example, and the
oh
NHS.
my God, the Tony Blair Institute. Oh man, you're vocalizing several of my worst nightmares in a row. It's like they really. Oh my God, the complex. The institutional complexes behind these things, but they also represent. Also already, that's the thing, they always already also condense the kind of things that most people here today would probably see their very purpose of existing as opposing. They're already those bad things, and I'm saying, for me, the particular kind of way I define AI is it is really just a concretization of that stuff. But that to tackle that kind of thing, we are absent of a technopolitics, which would also allow us to ask the questions about all these other technologies, and do so from the kind of social grounding that actually some elements of Maori culture and community still have, and we don't. So I think it's a provocation. AI is a massive provocation.
One thing what you're saying reminds me of is there's this bit from Marshall Mcluhan in War and Peace in the Global Village, where he talks about how technology is both. Oh, sorry. Okay, I'll skip that. I'll just go to Phoebe, because I was waiting for Phoebe to ask a question. Phoebe, go for it.
No, that's okay. I'm happy to. I wanted to hear what you had to say.
Okay. So the thought was there's one part where Mcluhan says that technologies extend human capacities. So, for instance, the wheel and the car allows us to travel farther, but every extension is also an amputation. So the apparent extension also, let's say, changes our subjectivity or our internal capacities by underdeveloping a capacity we had before. And so what I was going to ask is how would you think that dynamic plays out in terms of AI? Like, by extending certain capacities, how is it transforming, let's say, subjectivity? Or is it too big of a question?
Yeah, I can actually jump into that's perfect because it's quite linked. I have a video. Sorry, I think it is actually working today. Hi, Dan. Nice. Oh, here. Oh, there you go. Hi, nice to see you. And thank you for speaking. I really appreciate this and your book. And I'm really interested in some of the things that you say in the book, particularly around the subjectivity point, because I think you are addressing one of the most important questions and problems within this. And I'm wondering, because you talk about sort of algorithmic morality judgments as part of that risk that I think is being posed in this new kind of hyper association with the machinic in this very uncritical and not uncriticized, as it were, way. And I'm wondering, what is it in terms of the subjectivity point? Because grappling with social relations as a question, with even if you want to sort of look at Honneth's work, or if you even want to be Hegelian, I mean, I'm really curious around how interested are you in trying to have a kind of what is human question? Because I've seen that a lot recently, especially, and I'm kind of grappling with it myself. I'm wondering what kinds of things you would argue in terms of subjectivity, because that's already a concept that has a literature. And then, yeah, and is this only around the morality question, or is it about this authentic self, which you also mentioned in the book, and also around the stigmatizing aspects around categorization and the sort of historical precedent there? And what is the most important, I guess, in sort of critical moment within AI being? And you've mentioned it in the talk, but I'm wondering if that was something that you could address again. So thank you. And thanks again for speaking.
Yeah, thanks very much. You're very welcome, and thanks very much for the question. And I apologize in advance for my almost inevitably inadequate answer. I mean, I think if I can just start with the easy bit in a way, which is the what is human question, is like, to me, I guess I would personally, and what I'm trying to do now is express, my starting point, if you like, with this, or my interest point, is kind of very little interest in that question. In the same way that I have very little interest in the question of what is intelligence, not because they aren't interesting questions, profound ones, but it's not my most immediate point of concern. I mean, it connects, obviously, right? Because I'm not interested in finding what is the human, only that I'm most interested in the bit where people go, they are less than human. That's the bit that motivates me. And I guess that's why, the anti-fascism thing was always a starting point for me, because my personal kind of, my hackles are always raised in situations that it seems to me that some people are being regarded as less than human in some way. And that is the kind of the forms of subjectivity, if you like, and social relation that make that possible. I mean, we're living in a world of that right now at a scale that none of us could have imagined in our worst nightmares, I don't think. We are watching a genocide live on social media and TV, and it's still happening, and it hasn't been stopped. And, however we understand our own entanglement in that or not, that's just that's happening. And what I'm concerned about most immediately, because I from my own personal interpretation, have kind of a few ways to touch that directly, is the fact that seems to be everywhere. I mean, I was looking at, because I follow a little bit of stuff around mental health, and, there's a huge alarm in the disability community, not just mental health, but in the disability community, about proposals that the new government have, inevitably for getting everybody back to work. So obviously they're going to do that because they're Tories, but the new government, I mean. But the mode of doing that inevitably comes with, well, basically eugenicist perspective, that these lives are worthless unless they're working, essentially, and they're burdens, they're powers, they're a burden on the system, they're a burden on all of us. Those are the kind of the sort of, I guess, maybe they're better described as beliefs or something like that massively concern me, in the way that there's a kind of contagion of those kind of beliefs. And I have experienced those different things. I've experienced those kind of, I've directly encountered and engaged with those kind of expressions, and with their opposite, with people's attempts to reconstruct for themselves a space that they feel to be, really inclusive and valuing all life, and not just human life. Obviously, that's the really important question now, but valuing at the very least all human life, allowing it to be itself in its diversity. And that's one of the things, again, sorry, I may be rambling a little bit, but I'm just trying to throw out some crumbs that connect you to where I'm coming from without being able to sum it up. That's one of the things that interests me the most about the school system at the moment in the UK, which is that it's totally broken. It's absolutely broken, because on the one hand, you've got this still existing zero tolerance policy where, that is hyper conformity and hyper discipline. At the same time, there's much more recognition and understanding, and also I think just much more of anxiety and neurodiversity and everything else. And the risk with AI is the automation, the rendering of these lives as less valuable in some way. And not only that, but sort of streamlining and making efficient pathways in which they can be, suitably kind of dealt with in a way, whatever that means. So my interest is the production and reproduction of those mentalities, if you like, those shared frameworks that allow those things to happen, and trying to establish, I guess, incubators for the opposite. And I wouldn't claim to, happily for me, be able to properly articulate. My approach to philosophy is very magpie-like. I just grab the bits that seem to be relevant and stick them in where they can make a difference. My understanding of the AI apparatus is, on the basis of Karen Barrad's sort of idea apparatus. So I try to take those ideas because I think it's important to go to the root of things. But my basic interest is not really in answering any of these questions. It's challenging the bits that are so clearly going wrong and trying to argue for spaces to allow them to emerge differently.
Well, one of the things that gives the empirical demonstration of what you're saying in terms of looking at workplace environments is that technologies with AI augmentation are often deployed without full understanding, and for some reason it seems to not be criticized that management is in a position to say, well, we don't actually know what this technology might do in terms of your data collection, and then a lot of that is supposed to be communicated with workers, whereby that data turns into something with material longer term consequences for them. So that's a relationality question that's interestingly being not attacked, that's not the right word for it, discussed, and potentially still limited, but discussed in policymaking circles because of the longitudinal dimension of it. So there's like a future tense in terms of ex post for implications, but still this understandability question, the trustworthy questions, these all have already existing human recognition or understanding of what they are. So I think it's, excuse me, seriously bad allergies. Sun comes out and I can't even go to the park because I'm sneezing.
Oh no.
Yeah, no, it's bad. Anyway, okay, cool. But no, that's the kind of thing I'm just really interested in trying to get the more empirical points around exactly these questions, because if the relevance for your argument in terms of then how to manage that and also resist comes about with the solidarity, which we don't need to rewrite what solidarity is. It's because we know it, in the autonomy things that you write about, it's more to say, well, once you introduce this supposedly more intelligent machine and computational kind of entity into a decision-making framework, then you've baby with bathwater. I mean, it's quite remarkable how we've kind of got to a point of that kind of takes for granted that the technology is there and objectified in such a way. And I think the philosophy questions are important, but and as you say, I don't think we need to complicate it in the sense of trying to rewrite philosophy. Having said that, I think a lot of the questions have been asked, and why I think that's what you're saying, the AI point matters is because there's so much agency ascribed to something that clearly has an objective measure. And so, yeah, that's really interesting.
Well, and the interesting thing for me, these things, I think all these questions would be very valid if this was an incredibly powerful technology. But the really interesting thing is, it's basically a bit shit.
It's narrow. Yeah, no, that's what's
just crap. It's really just crap. I mean, I would not go near anything by AI.
Yeah, no, it's the belief dimension to it that really mobilizes it within these, they even call them seasons. I think we're kind of going to the autumn though. I think summer, this summer is.
Well, the question I was asking the other day, which you might have a handle on, it's like, where do we look to find out which pension funds have invested massively in AI? Because that's a really big concern, because this stuff is going to blow. But as ever, it's going to be us who pays for it.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of, no, it's absolutely right. And there's no clear advancements that we can find so far from AI application. And that's absolutely why we need to sort of start looking into other things like exactly your point, genocide, sort of ecological questions, and shifting that away and actually reminding ourselves how to survive on the planet without killing each other too much. It's already 1 o'clock. Stephen, does that mean we finish, or I don't know? Is this an hour seminar? It is, isn't it? I don't want to keep
You're on mute, Stephen.
Oh, mute.
These things are flexible. Actually, one of the funny things was we used to have hour-long seminars because we had room bookings. And it's funny that even though we're now actually not physically in a room, we end up still in the slot of an hour, even though the actual physical constraint isn't present anymore. But yeah, I mean, I suppose we'll probably get to wrapping up in the near future because people probably have to go.
I should go. Thank you for being with us.
Any other questions for Dan, or maybe we should
There's-
take that sort of collapsing pension funds and possible genocide or ongoing genocide as being a nice, happy point to conclude on. Geez, feels like Monday again.
Yeah. Oh
I
yeah.
mean, there's a question in the chat from, I can't know, Faizan, which is,
I missed that.
yeah, what two preconceived notions were challenged as a person and a professional during your research? That's a nice question. Well, I mean, the one easy one was that I thought I could cleverly write a way of turning this technology for good. That was disabused. And excuse me, that's my dog. Yeah, I professionally, yeah, I suppose I'm professionally supposed to be a working computing and computer science. So that's like, you know, I've ended up like siding with Joseph Eisenbaum, and so I'm really wondering whether computers per se are the problem, are a problem. We better off with that. There's my whippet telling me it's time to go. I don't know if you can hear that barking in the background, but she's going full on.
Cool. Okay. So where's this book thing? Okay, cool. Okay, well, with the dog, I'm pronouncing the ending. Then I think we'll leave it at that, and also say thank you a bunch for coming along, Dan. That was super interesting, and we'll hopefully talk again soon. Okay.
Yeah, thanks everyone for coming and for the questions and participation, and yeah, thanks Stephen.
Thanks very much, Dan.